Upon entering the office, I was able to take a fresh look at the coroner's office, and from my perspective, the office has not been able to grow at the rate that I perceive that the population of the county is growing. I'm a fiscal conservative, but I think our responsibility as elected officials is to make sure that we meet the needs of the community, and it's growing. One thing that's also interesting is that a lot of people, I understand, don't like to talk about death. Therefore, the topic of coroner and death doesn't come up very often. But we're commissioned by the people of Kootenai County to meet the needs adequately. And we want to thank the board for the support that you've provided for us so far and the encouragement in this expansion process that we are experiencing right now in the office. But if I may, before we go into the budget, if I may give a step back from the trees and give a big picture of the forest, I think that's kind of important. And I know that you as board members are well aware, but also we know that members of our residents in Kootenai County may not be aware of some of these details. I just wanted to touch on them before we go into the budget, if that's okay. Sure. Since 2012, the coroner's office budget has remained consistently at 0.4 to 0.5% of the total county budget. So therefore, any increase in our budget is not going to make or break Kootenai County. And so when we talk about increases, I would hope that everyone understands we want to be very cognizant of our costs, but we need to bring it up to the needs of Kootenai County and the growth rate. Our for example, our biggest budget expense, autopsies, have risen on a 3-year average of 28% since 2015, but our budget still remains at 0.5% of the total county budget. By comparison of the two other larger Idaho counties, Ada County has a total of 520,000 residents. They cover 1,060 square miles, and they have 30 death investigators. Canyon County has 243,000 residents covering 604 square miles and have 5 investigators, which is actually, to my understanding, 5 full-time. I spoke with them at a conference recently, and those are 5 full-time investigators. Kootenai County is the 3rd most populous county in the state of Idaho, with 180,000 people covering 1,300 square miles, and has 2 full-time and 2 part-time deputy coroners. And you guys have been gracious enough to allow us to expand into 2 additional part-time investigators, which we are thankful for. But when you look at Ada County, for example, they have 2.8 times the population, but 7.5 times the investigators. And if our 2 part-time were taken as a full-time, we have 3 and they have 5. So in other words, we are behind in the investigative capability, and certainly our staff, for example, just in 2 weeks, we had 4 deaths or 5 deaths in one weekend, and our 2 part-time people used up all of their hours in one weekend, and that remained our remaining 2 full-time investigators had to cover the remaining 12 days of that 2-week time period. To just give you an idea that there's greater stress being applied to our staff, and so just wanted to let you know where that was at and give you an update. But another important point is that it's not just the population that's within the county. We are a resort destination. And because we are such, we are responsible for any deaths that are occurring from out of state or out of our region. And the recent unfortunate marathon death is an example of our responsibilities. To give you just some idea of our extended responsibilities as a resort location, according to the Idaho State Police, Silverwood has 500,000 visitors that meet annually. So we're responsible for anything that could occur associated with Silverwood and those extra 500,000 people. That doesn't even account what's going on with the hotel in downtown, the convention center, the fairgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. We try to get those statistics and they weren't readily available, but as we all know, there's a lot of people that come into Kootenai County and we're responsible for it all. And unfortunately, in addition to that, Spokane County, which is next door with 235,000, unfortunately their drug trade is spilling over into Kootenai County. And we're responsible for deaths. We've had several deaths recently from drug abusers who were in Kootenai County doing their activity. And so it's not just the 189,000. That's the point being made. So as we continue to grow, and the coroner's office needs to grow at the same rate, and we're trying to do everything we can. As you know from my recent presentation, we're applying for accreditation to become only the 42nd county in all of the United States to have accreditation, which opens the door for us to apply for grants because we need refrigeration, additional vehicles, additional staff, training, and more. And from our perspective, we need to grow for several years to meet the county's growth, and we've started that process and feel an urgency to do so. Much of our budget that's presented here is basically we're at 0.5% of the total county budget, and we're looking for an increase of 21% of that 0.5%. But much of that training has to do, or much of that increase in our budget has to do with equipment and training of the 2 new staff that are coming, the equipment associated to provide that for them. And it looks like we may be able to expand from our current location. We are located right now in a pod that was a work release for inmates, and we have 4 offices within that one pod. And so it looks as if we may be able to expand from that facility to provide more office space. And so the utilities that are associated with expanding into that location, and perhaps the MCC building that we may be able to expand to, we incorporated those utilities into our budget as well. So all of that that's been incorporated in is just the combination of utilities and the new staff that are coming on.
Okay, so the expansion of the pod, you haven't brought that up to facilities working group or anything like that, right? That's just an idea that really hasn't been out in the open and vetted yet?
Well, from our perspective, what we've done is made, not officially perhaps, if there's something that we're missing on that, we were attempting to make it known that we need expansion from our current location, restrictions. So if there's something that we need to do to make that more official, we'd love to do that.
Okay. Probably just send me an email and I'll forward it to the working group so we can add that to our facilities working group. We can add that to our thought process.
And that's called the facility board?
Facilities working group.
Okay. Good.
All right, and so these utilities are for the second pod and the MCC building?
Well, or maybe a perhaps expansion, into perhaps more space within the current building that we're in. I don't know what the plans are for that building. At minimum, for us to apply for accreditation, to meet accreditation, we need at least a second pod.
Okay.
If that building was going to be moved, or if the residents of the current building were going to be moved to the Kootenai Electric building, we certainly would be able to fill a lot of that space as well, especially with the new staff coming on. But at minimum, we would need another pod. And
then do you have any capital requests to finish out that second pod?
As far as the pod is concerned, no, because
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, just making sure, because I don't think any of the moves have been put into the capital, so we're going to have to figure that out. And
it's a matriculation process of the whole process.
Yeah, and it may not be till next budget year.
Right.
So that's probably a lot of those things are going to happen because KCSO won't be fully moved until really halfway through next budget season. So if that's still happening, that's not been decided upon yet, but.
And that's why it was hard for us to create a budget, not knowing.
Right.
So many unknowns, right?
But to finish out the MCC building, that wasn't included either, correct?
No, that was not included. What we're hoping is that at this point in time, the accreditation that we're applying for would open up the potential of grants, and since
then use grant money for that.
We would try to use grant money for that and not have that be a burden on the citizens of Kootenai County. I mean, I'm serious about being a fiscal conservative, but the infrastructure's got to be there too.
Trying to be forward-thinking at the same time.
Sure.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
No, I think that's very prudent. When you were giving all the statistics about Ada, Canyon, and Kootenai, do you have the death numbers? So what's the death rate per each of our 3 counties, comparing that?
Actually, I didn't. I would assume that I made an assumption that they were budgeted according to their needs, but.
Right.
I
That
don't
would
have
be
those
helpful
numbers.
for me. I don't know about anybody else, but
Well, I agree. I think it's, important that we have the right numbers, the metrics, the drivers for your office.
Sure,
Of course, we want to fund the office to your needs,
right.
but we want to make sure,
but if we're
clearly.
using comparisons, then we need the full comparison
Okay.
data.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
We can do that. That would be easy to provide.
Okay?
And the only other question I had is just, right now you have 2 full-time, 2 part-time, and you're getting 2 more part-time, is that correct?
Correct.
At what point would you think that it makes sense to either take 2 of the part-times and make them a full-time? Or,
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. And the reason is that our 2 part-time people are extremely experienced, and they have a limitation with PERSA as to how many with how many hours they can put in. They're exceedingly competent individuals, and in this field, it's kind of interesting that these investigators see very difficult circumstances every day, and even with tremendous experience, it's not easy necessarily to leave the scene of a death and not be emotionally affected. I mean, we're all human, and there's a lot of experience in these individuals, and so it's not as if you can easily make application and bring someone in easily. What we've done is, in this current application process, we found an outstanding person that we've located with a lot of experience and who will be able to step into this position very, very well and work complementary, get along with everybody. But it's a very unique position. It's not easily translated over. So, I mean, we're kind of limited because of their Percy limitations. But the new gentleman coming in was requesting 30 hours. So of the 2 additional part-time, that's what I had asked for at the end of the last meeting. Could we provide the benefits, because if we find a very competent individual, they may need the benefits to fill that position, and that worked perfectly because this person will work very well. So we would love to be able to have more full-time, and I think that's going to be necessary because the staff is still stretched with with what we're doing right now.
yeah, I see your department as being in that unique transition phase where, before you're able to kind of accept resources however you could get them. But as you kind of expand and grow a little bit, you really have to start formalizing that a little bit more. And so you don't want part-time people's retirement to be driving your policy decisions for how
No,
you
you're
grow.
absolutely right.
So-
That's a great point, Bruce.
Yeah.
That's a great point. And if we had the freedom to know that, that we can offer full-time positions and start advertising full-time positions, we would love to be able to do that. And
But to your point, though, part-time actually can work out better emotionally and for people with a lot of experience because they're usually retirement age and they're coming from another agency. So there's that balance between,
Exactly.
The struggle that we were having with this interview process was that we had great candidates, but they were also full-time firefighters and/or full-time police officers. That, in my opinion, to have 2 full-time jobs or a full-time and a part-time job that is so emotionally driven, that's a lot for one person to handle, as well as being on call for that rotating period, because they're on call for their own agencies. To
Right.
be on call for our agency would be just super emotionally difficult, and extremely physically difficult as well. So our part-time people that we have, thankfully, also were retired people from Percy and things like that. We did have a couple of really great candidates that were a little bit younger, but didn't have the experience that we need. And we'd love to train from the ground up and keep somebody for the next 20 years.
Right.
And so that I can retire someday. That'd be great.
Yeah. So, and just to my point is I think this office in particular can have a little bit more flexibility than just working towards all full-time employees.
Well, I agree, and it should be as for as long as you can, but at some point, you need to know when you need to start making that change.
Well, and I would agree with you that the two part-timers, I mean, they're not gonna be there forever. I mean, you know, they're ending and talking about how they're not gonna be able to do this forever, and so we wanna glean all of their information and experience that we can, but use that to train new people. So that's why it would be wonderful if we could talk about more full-time positions with the board so that we could request and expand on that, because we're just happy to go for what we can right now to just meet the needs, but boy, I'd love to enter into a discussion further on this line, because if, as Lynn was saying, if we could train people from the start and they'll be here for 30 years, that'd be wonderful. And one of the main keys that we had during our interview process was, you know, how do you handle difficult situations? How do you relieve your stress? How do you, you know, because it's, I mean, until you're out in the field and you're doing this, in fact, one of our part-time people was the one who investigated the gentleman who unfortunately was knocked off the road and had to rappel down 400 feet to get to the body of that truck that went over the edge.
Yeah.
And so that's, I mean, this is not something for people that aren't able to do a lot of writing. They're very special people, and we feel passionately about them and want to protect and not overwork them, you know.
Well, I agree with Commissioner Duncan. I think if you have a metric, which I assume for your office, I mean, I don't know what the right term is, it wouldn't be a patient, and I wouldn't call it a customer.
Decedent.
A decedent, then it's the number of decedents that your office sees, which will drive your staffing levels.
Right, and we're currently at 677 decedents for the year. I can tell you that. That's up a day.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's just 5 months into it. So, and we're at 14 suicides and 9 overdoses so far.
Yeah.
And summer's just now getting here. And we're entering the 100 most deadly
Deadliest
days of the year as well. So what we're running into as well is that with holidays throughout the summer and stuff, we're now having to not only have one person on call, but we have to have one person on call and one person for backup. And it has to be a designated person because, like he was saying, our deputy was up in the mountains rappelling 300 feet down to a creek. And, you know, who's going to cover the rest of the county? So now we're running into that. We can't just run this county by ourselves on call. We have Ironman, a full Ironman coming up this summer. So that's going to be interesting. And that's always the same time as Hoop Fest. So that's always interesting as well. We've been able to cover it. We've been handling. But we're getting definitely to the point that we need staff. We need full-time staff. We need all the things.
And my gut feeling is, I'm born and raised in North Idaho. My gut feeling is I think of North Idaho as, you know, little North Idaho, but I also feel that North Idaho has been very, very fortunate that we haven't had a big event here. And I think we need to gear up and prepare so that we can handle larger events, because we've got that potential of occurring in a lot of different scenarios, and our office would be overwhelmed rather rapidly. And we're fortunate, but that's why we're trying to move as quickly as we can. And then you add on top of that the whole notion of celebrities and people that are now getting homes on Coeur d'Alene Lake. The paparazzi, the press that would come in if something's not handled in a way that is of utmost professionality. You need resources to be able to do that, and so we want to be able to be there to meet that need, absolutely.
As well as hiring staff, it requires equipment, training, space. We have 4 offices crammed upstairs right now in that pod. And we're all kind of like, we can't, you know, we're talking over each other. So that it's just moving, it's just shaping our new environment and growing with our county that is exceedingly fast.
For personnel, the only thing that you've asked for is on-call pay?
Correct,
Okay.
so far.
And that's just to meet what is basically occurring with the other agencies. You know, the prosecutors have, you know, an on-call and.
Well,
so
I'll just let you know how I look at it, and I've said this in open meetings before. The prosecutor's different. Those are all exempt employees. So they'll all be requiring, above and beyond what they normally do. I don't like it for people who are going to get paid overtime anyway, who are going to get, paid for their time out.
We don't get paid overtime.
Well, right. Did you put any overtime in this year's budget?
We have not.
We have not, and one is that basically our two part-timers cannot receive, they can only, because of person, they
Right,
can only receive a
19
settlement.
hours. Right.
And
So-
I'm the only exempt, so Joanne would be the only one that is the
So-
full-time.
Yeah, so we had a whole discussion about, do you want to request overtime or on-call? And based on the fact that most of them can't even take overtime, and from what I'm told, they have the same requirements as the deputies in terms of carrying the phone, not drinking, responding in an hour, staying with the body till it's picked up. They wanted to do on-call, because that
Instead of
aligns
overtime.
quite similarly
Sure.
with the deputies.
Yeah. Okay.
And would that be a fair balance, I guess, between overtime and or on-call pay? Because like I said, I'm the only one that's exempt. Joanne's the only other full-time person.
Right.
The rest are part-time people, so,
Sure.
and Percy.
Well, we'll take it under consideration.
But I'm very excited by your comments and your concerns about thinking of the future so that we can start, if we can start budgeting for and isolating and identifying, not isolating, but identifying those potential full-time people so that we can use our current expertise to train them over the next year or two. It'd be great if we could take that step to even add, another full-time position or two to just, because our two part-timers are not going to be there forever. So, and it takes months to train them. It's not like a weekend. It takes months to train them. So it would be, I was hesitant to request more when we'd already asked
Right.
before, so, but thank you for the
Well,
suggestion.
you need to fill the positions and let us know how you're doing.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, I think it would have been a little bit premature to do that unless, the deaths have tripled. Right? But we don't have that information, so we can't make that determination. So,
Right.
yeah. No, just a few other questions. So the pathology and radiology services, it looks like it's increased 18%, 31 to 200 and a $31,000 increase to the $204,000. So what is driving that?
That's our autopsy budget.
Part of that is they moved some from account 8199 into account 8177.
The professional services
So it's a
decrease.
net increase of about 17,000.
Okay,
Right. Yeah, in other words, we, in reviewing the definitions of what should be put into the categories,
Into the GL codes.
we moved budget, but it wasn't as much of an increase, because we also reduced it in the other locations.
correct. Yeah, I see it's a $13,000 reduction. Okay, so essentially that's because fees are increasing, or you just think the volume's going to increase?
Spokane County's fees will go up. They go up every year.
Okay,
As well as all of our cases for fentanyl cases. Of course, we send those over for autopsy, for
Gotcha.
prosecution in the future. So of course, with overdose deaths that go up, autopsies go up, all the things go up.
right. Which
So-
reminds me, I don't know if I mentioned it to either one of you, but I think that the opioid settlement funds is not going to be able to use for the testing, for the nice piece of equipment that you want.
It won't be able to
Randox.
use.
No, because it's not for testing, it's for treatment, education.
Oh,
Yeah, so not for testing.
Wow, I mean, I guess it all depends on how you
interpret prevention.
interpret, prevention. Because in other words, what that device can do is normally we wait 4 to 6 weeks to find out if it's a tox. But if we can drive a sample from a location and take it down to our office and within 30 minutes know a quantitative analysis, then while the investigators are still on scene, that would change investigation, it would change how rapidly we could go
So
after.
you can put your proposal forward to OEM, they're now handling that grant.
Okay.
Well, it's not a grant, it's a settlement.
Right,
And then
settlement.
they can contact the state or the federal government, who's ever, has those guidelines and,
Yeah,
ask the specific question for the specific piece of machinery.
we'll work forward on that proposal.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you're familiar with xylazine, but it's now being used as a contaminant in a lot of fentanyl cases.
Right.
And if, for example, and this machine can pick that up. So in other words, if there was a contaminated source of an illegal drug in Kootenai County and we could identify it within an hour, it could be in the press the next day that, watch out, this is
Right.
contaminated. I mean, that's true
So
prevention
maybe-
right there, rather than waiting 4 to 6
Yeah, our
weeks for.
education piece, so.
Exactly.
Okay, so I think the only other thing would be travel and training, and that would just be because you're onboarding your new people.
And not only that, I think from my perspective, the previously upon entering, there wasn't as much training as the staff had requested prior to my entering the office. So we're trying to catch up on that, because there's specific conferences around the nation that can hone in on particular areas that we may feel are a little bit weaker in our investigative capabilities, that we've already been sending people to, just to try to catch up, to bring us up to a standard that Kootenai County needs to be.
Right, and the accreditation will probably play into that as well,
Exactly.
so.
Definitely.
Okay, I don't have any further questions. Bill?
I do not.
Okay,
Yeah, I was just curious with the training, does that actually aid in the law enforcement side of this?
Definitely.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
We do all the same training that all of law enforcement goes to. We do all the homicides, all the child death trainings, ballistics, blood spatter, gun trainings. We do all of the same trainings that they do. And often, we are their eyes and ears on scenes to determine if detectives are even gonna come out. So they'll call it, the officer or deputy will call us first, and then we'll go out and we'll say, we're gonna need a detective out here as well. So sometimes we need to know, new officers don't always know exactly what they're looking at, or deputies. And so they need us to be able to make that call as well. So we need to have our skills up to par.
And in fact, we take, our pictures are very commonly used in court, because
So we
we
do our
are catching
photography.
things that perhaps others had not seen or whatever. So when we come on scene, we're looking at it from a point of view of, we absolutely have to rule out any nefarious activity before we make any assumptions about a death.
And what will be admissible in court, for sure.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you guys very, very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate you very much.
Yes.
you bet. All right, 11:45, we'll recess until 1 o'clock.